Papa, why didn't anyone come? The words hung in the air of the small cafe, spoken by a voice that had learned too young what disappointment felt like. Vivian Ashford sat in her wheelchair by the window, 26 candles flickering on a chocolate cake her father had ordered that morning. The reservation had been for 12. Only 2 chairs were filled. Marshall Ashford, 62, CEO of Ashford Industries, watched his daughter's face and felt his heart splinter. He'd sent the invitations weeks ago, to her former college friends, to cousins, to the few people they still called family. But the excuses had trickled in one by one. Too busy, out of town, maybe next time. They never said what he knew they meant. We don't know how to be around her anymore. They're missing out, sweetheart, Marshall said softly, but even he could hear the hollow ring in his voice. Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she touched the edge of her untouched cake. The accident 3 years ago, the drunk driver who'd run a red light, had taken her ability to walk. But it had stolen something else, too. The friends who couldn't look past the wheelchair, the life she'd been building, the confidence that had once lit her from within. Then, through the rain-streaked window, a small voice pierced the silence. "Daddy, look! That lady has a birthday cake all by herself. Can we join her?" Beckett Morrison stood in the doorway, his 4-year-old daughter Piper tugging at his hand, rain dripping from their jackets. He was 33, a single father who'd learned to navigate the world with a backpack full of coloring books and an endless supply of patience. He'd noticed the woman by the window, not because of the wheelchair, but because of the profound sadness in her posture, the way she sat before that cake like it was a monument to loneliness. And his daughter, with that uncanny perception children have, had seen it too. Marshall looked up, his weathered face cautious but curious. Vivian's eyes widened, uncertain. "I'm sorry, my daughter has a gift for asking impossible questions. We don't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Marshall interrupted, surprising himself. He glanced at Vivian, whose expression had shifted from resignation to something fragile, like hope testing its wings. "Are you?" Vivian shook her head slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "No, you're not." Piper beamed, dragging her father toward their table. "I'm Piper. Is it really your birthday? How old are you?" "I'm 4 3/4." For the first time that evening, Vivian smiled. A real smile. "I'm 26. That's a lot older than 4 3/4. "That's okay," Piper said matter-of-factly, climbing into a chair. "My daddy says age is just a number. What matters is if you're kind." Over slices of chocolate cake and cups of coffee that grew cold from conversation, the 4 of them became something unexpected, a makeshift family for one rainy evening. Beckett explained, haltingly, that Piper's mother had passed away 2 years ago from cancer, that birthdays had become bittersweet, celebrations tinged with absence, that he had learned to find joy in small moments because the big ones hurt too much. "I used to run a construction company, had a big crew, big projects. After Melissa died, I couldn't do it anymore. Now I'm a freelance carpenter. Smaller jobs, more time with Piper, less money but more of what matters." Marshall felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent 40 years building an empire, measuring success in quarterly reports and market share. He'd barely noticed when Vivian stopped calling him after her accident, too consumed by board meetings to see that his daughter was drowning. It had taken her suicide attempt 6 months ago, the pills he'd found just in time, for him to finally wake up. He'd stepped back from the company immediately, started showing up, learning too late that presence mattered more than presence. "I failed her," Marshall said suddenly, his voice cracking. "For 3 years, I threw money at the problem. Therapists, specialists, adaptive equipment. Everything except what she actually needed." Vivian reached across the table, her hand finding his. "Papa, you're here now. That's what matters." Beckett watched them, recognition in his eyes. "Guilt is a heavy thing to carry," he said gently. "But I've learned something about second chances. They don't erase the past, but they can reshape the future if you let them." As the evening deepened, Piper pulled out her coloring books and somehow convinced Vivian to draw with her. Marshall and Beckett talked about loss, about the weight of responsibility, about learning to forgive yourself when you've let down the people you love most. "You know what nobody tells you about being a parent?" Beckett said, watching Piper giggle at something Vivian had drawn. "That you'll get it wrong, a lot, and that the best thing you can do is admit it and keep trying." Marshall nodded slowly. "I'm learning that, slowly." At one point, Piper looked up at Vivian with those impossibly earnest eyes. "Why are you in a wheelchair? Did you get hurt?" "Piper," Beckett started, mortified, but Vivian held up a hand. "It's okay." She looked at the little girl, something softening in her expression. "Yes, I got hurt. A car accident. My legs don't work anymore." "Does it make you sad?" "Sometimes, but do you know what makes me more sad?" She glanced around the empty cafe, at the chairs no one had filled. "When people forget that I'm still me, that I still like cake and jokes and rainy days. They see the wheelchair and forget the person." Piper considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. Then she climbed down from her chair, walked over, and hugged Vivian fiercely. "I see you," she whispered, "and I think you're really nice." Vivian's tears came then, silent and cleansing, as she held this small stranger who'd given her something no amount of therapy had: unconditional acceptance. When it was time to leave, something unspoken had shifted between them all. Marshall insisted on paying for their meal. Beckett gave Marshall his number. "If you ever want company, we're usually at the park on Saturdays. Piper's always looking for new friends." Over the following months, those Saturday park visits became routine. Then, weeknight dinners. Marshall, who'd spent decades commanding boardrooms, found himself learning to push Vivian's wheelchair through trails Beckett knew, listening to Piper's endless stories, watching his daughter laugh again. He funded a scholarship at the local university for students with disabilities, not from Ashford Industries, but anonymously, in Vivian's name. She started volunteering at a children's hospital, reading to kids who understood what it meant to feel different. Beckett and Piper became the family they'd both needed. Not through romance, some connections run deeper than that, but through the quiet, steady presence of people who showed up. 1 year later, they gathered at the same cafe. This time, the table for 12 was full. People Vivian had met volunteering, friends of Piper's from school, even Marshall's assistant and her family. As Vivian blew out her candles, Piper 5 3/4 leaned over. "Did you make a wish?" She smiled, looking around the table, meeting her father's proud eyes, then Beckett's kind ones. "I don't need to. Everything I wished for is already here." Marshall raised his glass, his voice thick with emotion. "To second chances, and to the strangers who teach us what family really means." Later, as they prepared to leave, Beckett pulled Vivian aside. "You know what you taught me?" he said quietly. "That showing up is the greatest gift we can give each other. Not grand gestures, just presence, acceptance. Seeing people as they are, not as we want them to be." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "You taught me something too, that my chair doesn't define me, that the right people will always see beyond it." Piper squeezed between them, grabbing both their hands. "Can we have cake again next week?" They laughed, the sound echoing in the small cafe where a year ago a lonely young woman had sat before a birthday cake wondering if anyone would remember she existed. And a little girl had asked the simplest, most profound question:
Can we join you?" As Marshall helped Vivian with her coat, he whispered, "Thank you for letting me find my way back to you." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me, or yourself." Outside, the rain had stopped. The evening air smelled of possibility. "You know what I've learned, Papa?" Vivian said as they headed to the car. "Kindness doesn't require perfection. It just requires showing up with an open heart and seeing the humanity in everyone we meet, even, especially, the people the world has forgotten." Marshall felt the truth of it settle in his bones. A lesson learned late, but not too late. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive is the chance to give someone else what we've always needed: to be seen,
To be valued, to belong. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, subscribe, and comment.